So, after much delay, we finally get to the homosexual agenda exposed by the YouTube user The White Rabbit, or just White Rabbit, as I've come to realize. And just before we get into the actual content of the movie, or the video, I do want to talk about a few things that I've noticed, not just in this video, but with videos of the other Christian truther networks in general. So I, of course, have my little notes that I've made during watching his little offering. And yeah, the first thing on my list of things I wanted to mention is that the video we're getting into is the typical creationist, right-wing, conservative video that takes, in this case, like an hour or 30 minutes, I think it is. I haven't checked the time. Of just taking half an hour of saying something that could have been said in 10. It's a common theme with a lot of right-wing videos, right-wing Christian videos. For example, The Vigilant Christian does this all the time, where he wants to talk about one specific subject, say how, I don't know, just like Disney is evil, and then he goes on a long expose about the Freemasons, the New World Order, the Second Coming, all that stuff. And a lot of stuff that's not necessarily relevant to anything that's going on in the actual video. And the other thing that's interesting, especially with this video also, is that people like White Rabbit, people like the Vigilant Christian, have in recent time, whenever they tackle something like homosexuality, when they talk about evolution and all that stuff, what they do is they put a disclaimer on. I find that kind of interesting, because because the thing is, the whole thing with these disclaimers, it appears to have begun sometime around late 2014, early 2015. That's when I saw like the first few disclaimers on some of the Vigilant Christians videos. And I kind of find it interesting because if you look at any of, let's say, the Vigilant Christians material or the White Rabbit's material or any of those lunatics of the Christian Truther Network, any of their videos prior to 2014 or late 2014, they're just balls to the wall, racist, misogynist, disinformed, you name it. They're just balls to the wall, honest, to say that. Okay, so let's get into the actual content of this video, the homosexual agenda.
Now, to start off with, let me first explain to you my background with the homosexual community so that you can get a better grasp on where I'm coming from. Growing up, I have had numerous friends who identified as homosexual. In fact, I would dare to say that the majority of my close friends identified as homosexual. So believe me when I say this is not out of hate that I'm coming to you, but out of love and out of concern. Through my own life experience, I myself at one point questioned and struggled with my own sexuality. And looking back on that and that experience, I've really gained more of an understanding of the psychological element to homosexuality, but also the spiritual relation to it.
Okay, so the White Rabbit claims that, let's see, what did he say? He talks about the sexual confusion of the youth and how he himself knows some gay people, apparently. But the question is, why should we even believe him? Why should we even take him at face value? I mean, you and I know the old spiel of whenever I guess creationist gets on stage or gets on a podium and they claim to be an ex-evolutionist, an ex-atheist, and then they actually start talking about evolution and atheism and what they think it is, they usually always misrepresent it in some way, shape, or form. And this video that we're going to be, as you'll see, is sadly no exception.
Well, like I said, this was a long time ago, and thankfully I've gotten past this. I've been able to decipher and sift through the malarkey that is homosexuality, and I am now comfortable in my own skin, as God intended.
Ah, yeah, Leviticus 18:22, that famous verse that creationists or right-wing Christians always like to prop up in their defense of why homosexuality is a sin and it's evil and whatnot. But the thing is, to me, this entire verse seems kind of like a cop-out, because if you actually read Leviticus 18, the entire chapter sort of deals with, like, sexual purity, something along those lines. And it's, as I said, it's kind of a cop-out, because only 2 chapters later, in Leviticus 20:13, we get almost the exact same verse about how a man shan't lie with mankind as he does with womankind, that entire thing. And that chapter deals with how if your kid is rebellious, you gotta kill him. If your wife had an affair, you gotta kill him. If your slave is disobedient, you gotta kill him. So yeah, Leviticus 18:22, for me at least, is just the whole cop-out so that Christians can take the Bible and say, look, it doesn't actually say anything about killing someone else. But yeah, they'll ignore just the rest of Leviticus. And yeah, that's just that little thing I wanted to note.
It appears to me that on some level, on some genetic platform, some individuals are more or less susceptible to homosexual persuasions. And I believe that genetic makeup is somehow triggered by trauma at an early stage in life.
Wait, what? So, White Rabbit claims that gay people are gay or lesbians are lesbians because they got raped? Like, seriously? Is that his argument? I mean, for one thing, it's a horrible straw man because no one actually ever claims that. Only people like White Rabbit claim that. Also, by that logic, does that mean that someone who's lesbian or gay and who gets raped by someone else who is lesbian or gay then becomes straight? I mean, is that consistent with that theory?
And I also believe that people who are surrounded by demons, literal spiritual beings, demons, which I know for a fact do exist because I've seen them personally, but that's a discussion for a whole nother time, are more susceptible to giving in to that physical desire. It also goes hand in hand with Satan wanting people to worship him and to worship the things of this world. And what do demons do? They constantly push you towards earthly things. And homosexuality is one of the most physical and lustful sins that one can commit.
Okay, now we're getting into stupid territory here. Apparently, the White Rabbit thinks that gay people are possessed by demons. Well, of course they are. And that's a pervasive pattern that you'll find in a lot of right-wing Christian arguments when you get into, what causes crime, what causes violence, what causes all these things. They're always possessed by the devil or something. It has nothing to do with, what did I write down here? Yeah, it has nothing to do with criminal analysis with psychoanalysis by Freud. It has nothing to do with, let's say, the fact that someone who's born into a rather rough part of town is statistically more likely to commit a crime than someone born into, let's say, the burbs or something like that. And of course, it has nothing to do with the fact that someone who comes from I guess you call it dysfunctional family. That's sort of the term that they use. Someone who's born into a dysfunctional family is statistically more likely to commit a murder, commit rape, commit theft, whatever, than someone who's born and raised in, I guess in that case you would say, a functional family. No, forget all that. Forget what Freud, what modern criminal analyses are telling us. It's Satan, it's the devil, it's demons.
Now, if you watch the news and you see, for example, a 30 or 40-year-old teacher sleeping with their high school student who is, let's say 15 or 16 years old, most people would be disgusted by that and would not hesitate to believe that that should be against the law and then that teacher should be thrown in jail. And I'm just using this to illustrate my point, so hear me out on this. But in the case of homosexuality, it's actually a very similar thing, because in more cases than not, you have the dominant homosexual who attempts to court or persuade another member of the same gender to partake in a physical embrace. Now the thing is, especially younger people, who it seems more and more today are moving towards that lifestyle, they're usually people who are just spiritually misguided, to be quite frank. And so it could be viewed as a very similar situation. And the other more important part to this, which is why I think this is a more accurate comparison, is that when you see a pedophile, or you know that somebody's a pedophile, people look at it in a very different light than they do homosexuals nowadays. People look at a pedophile and think to themselves that they should be able to control their sexual urges, and that there is no reason that they should act on those impulses. Yet, when they look at a homosexual, they have nowadays the opposite response. They think that they should act on those impulses. And that to me is just a sign that there is something very backwards about our whole society.
Okay, now we're going into really stupid fuck-ass retarded territory. Now White Rabbit apparently conflates pedophilia, or being gay, being lesbian, homosexuality, with pedophilia. There are so many reasons why this is just such a horrible analogy, but thankfully the White Rabbit actually gives us this, and I have to give him credit for that he actually shows a case of a female teacher abusing her female student. I actually do have to give him credit for that, for actually demonstrating that yes, it's not always the male teacher and the female student, or the female teacher and the male student, but that it can go both ways. But the reason why this is such a fucking horrible, down to the core, retarded ass analogy is because, let's see, what did I write down here? Yeah. The reason why this is such a horrible analogy is because it always boils down to dependency, consent, and leverage. The reason why it's okay, and he says, why are homosexuals allowed to act on their behavior, whereas pedophiles, and I guess in this case that he props up, pedophile teachers aren't allowed to act on their inclinations, I guess, is because with a teacher-student relationship, the teacher has a certain leverage over the student. You see, if the student doesn't do what the teacher says, if let's say the teacher is male and the student is also male, if the teacher says, if you don't give me a blowjob, then I'm not gonna give you the marks you deserve, even though the paper you wrote, that essay you wrote, is at the A or B mark level. So that's why that's not a good thing, you see, because there's a certain amount of leverage. But when you're talking about what I forgot to mention is, this would also be a problem even if, let's say, for example, here in Germany, the age of consent is 16. It wouldn't matter. The age of consent would not matter in this case, as it still would boil down to the whole leverage thing, teacher having a greater influence, a greater leverage over the student. But when you're talking about two consenting teens or two consenting adults of the same sex or different sex, I mean, seriously, who cares? It's their private business. That's none of our, or in this case, White Rabbit's business, what they get up to in their private lives.
And now, I'm not talking about the laws, okay? When it comes to gay marriage laws and things like that, personally, I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. If two people want to commit themselves to a life of sin, they're going to do it with or without laws. So the whole gay marriage thing, it's really a non-issue to me. And in general, I believe the fewer laws and restrictions placed on us by our government agencies, the better. But this brings me to the point that people think that you're born homosexual and that you can't change, and that people who identify as homosexual are just homosexual and that we should accept it.
Now we're finally getting to the whole crux of the matter, so to speak. The age-old, from way back yonder argument of gays aren't born gay. They choose to be gay. Well, in this case, I could basically just ask the simple question, when did White Rabbit choose to be straight? When did anyone who's heterosexual actually choose to be heterosexual? And yeah, I know that's a horrible, horrible argument in a way to make, because it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, sort of sardonic response. So I'm just going to ask straight out, what about all the homosexual relationships in animals that we've observed, even in animals that, let's say, aren't as smart as magpies or crows, whose behavior is entirely instinctive and reflexive, and who can't actually make the certain cognitive choice of being gay or being lesbian that White Rabbit is talking about here. I mean, what about them? Yeah, so this was my little takedown of the whole homosexual agenda video by White Rabbit. And just as a closing statement, when talking about, pedophiles acting on their inclination, there's a really great website I would recommend anyone who's actually seriously interested in the science behind, the sexual science behind pedophilia, to go and check out the website, let's see, what was the name again? Yeah, Don't Offend. It's a German website. The German name of this is Kein Täter werden. I'll put a link to it in the description below. It's a really, really, really great website that deals with the whole issue of pedophilia and how it can be treated, if it can be treated, what are the causes of it, and gives great tips for, or there's a hotline I think you can call if you're actually pedophilic, if you actually have that quote-unquote normal sexual preference, because that's essentially what it is, very much like homosexuality, zoophilia, heterosexuality. It is just a quote-unquote normal sexual preference that you can't just put off. It's a great website. I would advise you to actually go take a look at it. It's really, really informative. Anyone who actually wants to get informed about this whole subject, the link is down below. And I'll be seeing you in some other video. I don't know when I'm gonna make another video. I've got a few things in my in the real world going on, because, well, there is a real world outside of YouTube. So I don't know when I'll be making another video, but a few things that you should be on the lookout for is, of course, more debunking vigilant Christian videos. He's made a few videos with some interesting comments on women. As you all know, his thoughts about where a woman's place is in life and all that stuff. Ridiculous nonsense, to put it in his words. I'll be making a few videos about that. Also, what you should be on the lookout for is I'm planning to do a video in response to all the arguments that the Discovery Institute has been coming up with in the past, let's say, 10 years, all the ways they've tried to make intelligent design palatable to the general public. You know, the whole teach the controversy, let the students decide, all those horribly, horribly failed attempts in getting the public to, I don't know, accept intelligent design, legitimize intelligent design. I don't know what they're trying to pull with this. And I want to do a video where I take all their arguments, all the stuff they said, and contrast this with the study of the Mayan culture, where I'll just point out all the goalposts, all the milestones that people in Mesoamerican studies have done, and just compare, like, what would happen if we'd actually let, back then when they did those major discoveries, what would have been the outcome if we'd actually let students decide, if we actually let, if we actually teach, or if we actually taught, you know, both sides of the issue. For example, a good example, just as a sort of preview, when the Mayan ruins of the Classic period were discovered in the 1800s by Catherwood and Stevens, people made all sorts of arguments about where the hell this culture came from. Oh, it could have been aliens. Oh, maybe it's some Mesopotamian settlement or something. And just contrast this. What would this have looked like back then if we actually made that mistake of letting the students decide, teach all arguments? You know, how far would that have gotten us in the 1800s? So I'm planning a video about that, I've also thought of just making an expose video of just the whole Mayan discoveries, or the history of Mayan discoveries from, when the Spaniards actually first decided to actually look into the culture they destroyed or almost destroyed, up until like recent discoveries, like the what did they do? Yeah, those infrared scanning techniques that they're doing now to find cities in the jungle. I've been planning to do a video about that, and a few other videos that I've been thinking about doing is a few explaining videos, where I'll just explain. I already have two videos in mind. One of them is explaining why is my channel named after the Mayan god of the dead, when most of the stuff I do isn't that Mayan based. Every now and again I'll just reference the Mayans. I do that a few times, but why do I have that channel name? And also what I'll do is a video explaining a little bit why I use the 1534 translation by Martin Luther instead of just going to Bible Gateway and just copying from whatever of the 21 different English Bible versions are out there that just fly my fancy, I think is the idiom. And yeah, so that's some of the things that I'm thinking of doing in the future. Like said, there is a real world outside of YouTube. I don't know when I'm gonna do them. Of course, that real world, and I'm just gonna do a really shameless promotional plug here, because as some of you know, I have a review channel, Das German Kritic, where I do reviews of German films entirely in English, in the nostalgia critic sort of fashion, the channel awesome kind of fashion. And I've recently just done a review of Felidae. Please check that out. The link is in the description. And yeah, so that's pretty much everything I had to say about the stuff that I'll be doing in the future. Please subscribe to my other channel. Please do. It's a very big help for me to know where I'm at, if people like my reviews, if not. And until then, just stay sane, and we'll see each other sometime.